This isn't gonna work well.
It's fun.
In this video, we're gonna take this broken down, desolate logging camp scene, and we're gonna return it to its former glory and make some improvements along the way. Hey everyone, I'm Steve Brown and welcome to It's My Railroad. On this channel, we bring you the highest quality modeling videos we possibly can, showing you how to make great models, diorama scenes, and even model railroad stuff like this, the regular guy kind of way. So if you're into that sort of thing, make sure and subscribe. And while you're over there, check out that join button to get access to even more content right here on It's My Railroad. If you've been with us for a while, then you'll remember the very first thing we did on It's My Railroad was to rehab my logging camp. I had one kind of logging camp, didn't like it, stripped it all down and rebuilt it. And I was pretty proud of it. Most of the structures I've got back here, if not all the structures, are from that rebuild that I did. Well, over the course of time, my wife and I moved from the house we were in to where we are now. And so I had to tear down the layout, but I wanted to save the logging camp scene because I was very proud of it. And so I did. And need to load this in without damaging it. Did that, and then I went ahead and I set the logging camp module back up in here. I got a 2x4 back here acting as a leg to keep it from falling over and suffering any real damage. Actually, it came out pretty good for all the moving it's had to do to get over here. I got the logging camp scene installed on the new railroad. I also brought Switch Junction with me over there because I like them both, and I was able to salvage both of them from the old layout. Spliced them in, did some scenery work around them, and then here you go. The logging camp used to stop right about here in the back, and so I added all that to the back of it to let the main line come up and around. It also gave me all this space back here to do some stuff with. So I had a vision in mind, and I started working on some sculpt and mold with some styrofoam and some cardboard with hot glue and all that. And I built the basic structure, painted it, and then just didn't touch it for a while. It just sat here for a while. So anyway, one day I was looking at it, and to tell you the truth, I was just tired of looking at this just brown paint. So I got on it. So the first thing I did was I went through and pulled off all the structures and anything else that I thought was salvageable from the scene. Then I got the shop vac out and removed the dust. This thing's been sitting here a while with sanding and drywall junk going on around it. And it was pretty dirty. So I vacuumed it all off. Then I got started on the very first treatment, and that is to take some gray acrylic paint and paint over these areas that I ultimately want to have some kind of a rocky finish to when I'm done. And then to keep things moving, while I let that dry, I went and I made another modification right here. This used to be one piece that I could take off, get in to clean the track, because I got a tunnel from here to there. And but I wanted to tie the scenery into the top of it. So how do you do that and still be able to take it off and put it on without damaging the scenery? So what I did is I set it up there, made a mark, cut it, and then glued the top piece back on. And while that glue was drying, I decided to go through and pull out all my tree stumps. I wanted to sort of landscape the area. So they were white glued in, and in most cases though, I was able to just wiggle them and pop them out. So at this stage, I've got the construction adhesive setting up over here, and I've pulled out those stumps, and by then, the gray paint on the rock faces had dried enough where I can go on to the next treatment. I have this technique where I'll take some black acrylic paint and I'll put it in a little cup and heavily dilute it and then use that as a wash. What that does, as you know, is it'll go through and it'll sort of pick up all the imperfections in the side of the rocks. It gives us some dimension, some depth, and come the end of the day, I just really like the effect. So I got the construction adhesive drying here. I've got the black paint drying up there, but I just wanted to keep moving. So what I ended up doing was moving over here to this little place where I used to call this the Virgin River Gorge. Now it is Beggar's Canyon, and I explained why in a different video. But I've got this big gap here between the fascia and the rock. The fascia is flat, the rock just isn't quite cut right. So easy matter to fix. I stuffed some wedges of styrofoam down in there. Then using my hot wire knife, I followed the contour of the fascia until I had the styrofoam pretty much following the contour of the fascia. With that all looking good, with the styrofoam dried over there, now on this whole edge, all the way over and around and down into the Beggar's Canyon, I just took drywall mud, my new best friend, and I started slathering it on all the way down and around to fill in that void and to cover up the styrofoam and things like that. Now, while that was drying, it turns out the black paint was drying up on the mountain, so I decided to get back up in there and use another old school technique, for me anyway, which is to dry brush some brown paint. Now, as you know, dry brushing is taking a little bit of paint on a brush, brushing most of it off, and then, in my case, hitting on a downward angle to get the tops of all these little nooks and crannies, almost as if dirt had been running down the hill across the rock face and getting caught on all the little edges. Unfortunately, I put a little too much paint on it, but you'll see at the end of it, it came out okay. And that's something else I'll tell you guys. I make mistakes all the time as I'm going through and doing this, and quite often you just keep moving and you cover that with some more scenery, you camouflage it, you trick the eye into seeing something else. It doesn't have to be perfect. Matter of fact, this is not perfect, even if you like the way it looks so far, definitely not perfect. So the technique involves letting that brown paint set up for just a little bit and then taking a wet brush, just water brush, and just sort of letting the water run down. And as you can see, it sort of streaks that brown down, again, catching the nooks and crannies on the way down, and overall making for a relatively nice eroded effect. Now, we're gonna put dirt up in here, we're gonna put ground cover up in here, and all kinds of other things, so you're not gonna see all of that. But in the areas you do see, it really is a nice effect. Okay, so we've got paint drying on the mountain. We've got drywall mud drying down here. What else can we be working on right now? Well, I decided I would go through and I would make me a whole bunch of tree stumps. Now, my friend Mike C gave me these twigs that I'm using for tree stumps. Now, I think they're called cherry wood. I'd have to go look it up to be sure. And Mike, if I'm getting that wrong, my apologies, sir. But anyway, they're dried out and their bark looks like scaled down tree bark. It looks like bark, frankly. So I just took my rail nippers and just cut some approximate lengths until I had a whole bunch of them. Now it's time to install those stumps. And to do that, I got out an assortment of drill bits. I got 3 of them out that roughly match the rough sizes of these stumps. Then I had to do something really fun. I would normally use that drill bit on a drill and just shoot these holes and not have a problem with it. It'd go really quickly because some of this is very hard, some of it's not, depends on the technique I used and where in construction I did it. But I couldn't get the drill in there. So what I ended up doing was holding onto it with my bare fingers and twisting that thing like you would in a pin vise until the holes pop through. I will admit, don't necessarily try that at home because I had all kinds of cuts on my fingertips by the time I was done. But you know, sometimes to make an omelet, you gotta break a few eggs. So anyway, there's my joke for the day. Once I had all the tree stumps sort of dry fitted into the layout, I just went through and took some white glue and just filled up the hole with white glue and stuffed the tree stumps in there. Once I had those tree stumps back up on the back part of the logging camp scene, the drywall mud had dried enough down here where I could sand it to follow the contour, make it nice and smooth. And then, like I would do anywhere else, I took some brown paint, some dirt colored paint, and just painted all the way down to about where this rock is back here. I used a technique where I sort of pulled away from the layout because I wanted the brown all the way to the top of the fascia. Ultimately, I was trying to get the scenery to translate all the way out to the top of the fascia. Once all that paint was on there and I let it sit up for a little bit, it does not have to be a long time for what I'm going to do next. Once it's set up, I was able to take some white glue and just brush it on everywhere down here. The reason I put all that glue on there is for the next step in the technique, which is where I take some regular dirt and I put it in a cup, put a stocking over it, and then just sort of sprinkle it on there and let it rain down, covering every possible square inch that I can with that dirt. It makes for a great ground cover. I did that for the entire logging camp scene, and come the end of the day, hopefully you can see in this shot that nothing looks as much like dirt as dirt. Frankly, a little sidebar for you. The reason I use real wood for my wood structures is I learned a long time ago, nothing looks like wood better than wood, so why not use it if you got it? Anyway, sidebar. So I got all that dirt installed, and now it's time to move on to the next step. For the next step, again, I did something a little unorthodox. I went out in the backyard and grabbed some of the wife's potting soil. The thing I like about this potting soil is because of all of its little woodish kind of fibers, simulated woodish fibers, when I sprinkle it on, it just looks like all the junk that's left over after a logging team has gone through and just cut down all these trees. Some kind of branch bark and pine needles and all this kind of junk. Just sort of decaying up in the forest. It's based on some prototype shots that I've seen. Now the problem with this potting soil is it's been out in the backyard and it was kind of damp, frankly. And I was a little concerned about little fellas living in there and coming to laugh on my railroad. So what I did, and it took me a while, I'm not going to show you the entire process, but I took my heat gun and I put this stuff in a crock pot so I wouldn't catch it on fire. This thing gets up to like the heat of the sun, frankly. Held it far enough away where I wouldn't blow it all out and just ran that over there until I felt all of it was dry. With the potting soil nice and dry, I just went through like you would with other kinds of scenery materials, grabbed a handful at a time and started sprinkling it on there. Now it's still a little clumpy, So I had to move it around a little bit with my hands, brush it into certain locations, and I just kept doing that until I felt like I had the look I was after. Now, before I move on to the next step, I'm going to point out the obvious, and that is this potting soil's got these little food pellets or something in them, right? And in my previous version of the railroad, I went through and picked all of those out because I did not like them. But in this one, they almost look like little rocks scattered here and there. And so, what the heck, there's like a million of them anyway. Who's got that kind of time? I don't. So I just left them. Now, hopefully you can see in this shot as I'm panning across that even without any greenery or any other scenery effect, it kind of looks like all this sort of pine mulch or something, I don't know, ground clutter in and around the trees. For me, personally, for a regular guy, I really like the way it came out, which is why I used it twice now in my logging camp. Now, a little bit more detailed kind of scenery. I figured back in the day there was some kind of pine needles on these trees, and they didn't take the pine needles with them, right? Some of them have decayed over time or whatever, but a nice look for a felled forest like this, in my humble opinion, is to take some brown static grass and just lightly sprinkle it on, especially around the tree trunks where the pine needles would have fallen. It's a really subtle effect. You don't exactly notice it's there, but without it there, something seems to be missing. So anyway, again, that's 2 times I've done this, and I actually did it way over there behind Switch Junction. I just really like the effect, and the end result works for me. Once I had that sprinkled on sort of the felled forest areas, time to glue on some more ground cover. Now here's the deal. I should have vacuumed the top of this hill off first, and I didn't. So right now I've got the glue running down on top of the dirt. It's kind of making a bit of a mess, but destroyed my brush, by the way. But I was able to brush the glue around enough and get it to stick where I could go ahead and add some more ground cover. Now, unlike down at the logging camp where I've got some dirt with ground cover, I had this vision for the mountain itself, never having trees on it. It's up a little higher, I guess, in altitude. And so I just used some ground cover from Woodland Scenics. It's blended turf. Once that was stuck down to the glue, I just went through randomly grabbing some greens of different color of ground foam and sprinkling on there here and there. Again, letting my eye be my guide. And then there were a couple imperfections left over that I decided I would just go through and put some shrubbery on. And while I was doing it, I just planted some shrubbery in and around that mountainside. Well, the next one is something that I believe I regret doing, frankly. This is a huge area that we've got to glue all that ground cover down. And normally what you would do is take a pipette with some isopropyl alcohol, 70% in it, and use that as a wetting agent to wet an area down. And then for me, I take about a 25-75 mix of white glue to water, mostly diluted white glue, and use a pipette and put that down on there. But looking at how much of that I have to do, I didn't feel like spending the time, so I took a shortcut, and I think I regret doing it, frankly. I put my isopropyl alcohol inside of one of my spray bottles, and then I stood back here and I just let it rain down alcohol on top of the entire scene, which was kind of okay, I guess, except originally it was blowing off some of the ground cover. That wasn't awesome. And by the time I was done, I almost couldn't be out here. The fumes from the alcohol were so pervasive, I almost started getting a little tipsy just from the alcohol fumes, so that was fun. But I didn't let that stop me. I went ahead and put a 25%, 75% mix of white glue to water in another spray bottle, and then I went and I sprayed down the whole logging camp with it. Okay, it stuck everything down, but suddenly I had this caked on glue on my track, on my backdrop. Wasn't the smart move. So listen, if you're used to using pipettes to get that done, my recommendation, stick to the pipette. That's a regular guy tip for you right here on It's My Railroad. Once I put all that glue on there and let it dry, I gotta tell you, I was pretty happy with the end result. I really think it matches what I was seeing in my head well enough anyway that I don't think I need to do any more on it. I went through, put all the structures back in the way they originally were, and what you see now is the finished product of the S.L. Brown logging camp. So there you go. That's how I rehabbed my logging camp. Hopefully we'll never do that again. Hopefully the mistakes I made I won't repeat, but hopefully some of the regular guy techniques you've seen in this video, you can use for your video. So thank you very much for joining me today on It's My Railroad. I had a ton of fun working on this project. Hope you had a ton of fun watching the video. And until next time, my name is Steve Brown, and rail on, my friends.